Thank you so much, Ambassador Page. Something that you mentioned that I thought was in a great example of the true representation of diplomacy on the ground was that diplomacy can be considered as the shoes on the ground, but not. What is it that your organization brings to the table when we're looking to work with other 3D cones, such as diplomacy and development? Colonel Washington, turn it over to you
Thank you.
on what it actually means to get things done. And Ambassador Bonnie Jenkins, the founder of WCAPS, thank you so much for joining us today. Double down and define that, perhaps getting things done, the overall definition could potentially be it's the goal of trying us coming together essentially to achieve a common goal, right? It's going to be different. So, Ambassador Page, how do we manage these conflicting objectives? Thank you so much, Matt Butler. And I love your proactive, forward-looking approach. That's my approach as a diplomacy consultant from the private sector space, is that if there's a will, there's a way. And if we're having this discussion here, and again, thank you to Ambassador Bonnie Jenkins for creating this platform so that we can unite to talk about the way forward, which leads me to my next point. We're living in a times where global security is constantly changing. The environment is shifting. Right now we're currently experiencing a global pandemic. So as you guys have mentioned, we've heard from diplomacy, defense, and development. It's obvious that a whole of government approach is going to be absolutely necessary, which encompasses the different capabilities such as development, diplomacy, and defense, right? It's going to be even more crucial in protecting the homeland and promoting U.S. foreign policy. For example, in the future of operating this environment, we're going to face major threats such as great power competition, whether it's from China, Russia, or North Korea, or Iran. COVID-19, or even cyberspace security threats, or in some cases, the instability of failed states that those may bring. These resulting humanitarian crises, disaster relief operations, and a slew of number of security challenges, those may potentially negatively impact the United States. You kind of alluded to it, Diplomat Butler, in terms of the role that USAID now has that they didn't have prior to, such as their role with the NSC. So what is your recommendations for how the 3Ds can ultimately work more effectively together in the future? Did I hear you hinting, and since the goal of this series is at the end, is for us to come together and create a memorandum that we can then translate over to the government and other stakeholders that are interested in cooperation between the 3Ds. Are you hinting perhaps maybe at a 4D? To you as we work on this memo. This is a great introduction to the first piece of this memo that my colleagues and I are going to work on. And so, Colonel Washington, you've heard from your colleagues from the development side that says, hey, development has a place in what we're doing, and we want to have that position much earlier on into the mission. You heard diplomacy give us a great example into what this potentially could look like, highlighting some of the issues that we currently see, and what it could look like in practice if the 3Ds work more effectively together. As the boots on the ground, what is your recommendations for how development, diplomacy, and defense can work more effectively together? It's diversity into diplomacy. I'll keep pushing that 4D. Hopefully someone will listen to that. But one question that came up, and thank you, Ambassador Page, for acknowledging what's currently happening today. As many of us have heard the news, one of our allies lost their leader. And so I appreciate Ambassador Page for taking that moment to acknowledge that. And so one of the questions in the chat pertains to this. It says, Haitian professionals in the diaspora, politically neutral, would love to lend a hand in the economic growth of Haiti. This group of professionals include lawyers, doctors, teachers, nurses, law enforcement officers, and Haitians trained as diplomats, to name a few. How do we go about engaging with the State Department, USAID, and or the U.S. Embassy to secure their help in facilitating this exchange of ideas and expertise with Haiti? I guess the question is, is asking, and maybe you guys, if you haven't had experience working with Haiti, or if you want to abstain from making any particular statements as directly, since this is an issue that's going on live, perhaps a question could be, what role does civil society have in working as partners with the 3Ds? Is there a role? How does defense, diplomacy, and before we close out, we will now stop the recording.